So we'll kind of kick things off. Thanks everyone for participating in the social. We do those 6:45 to 7, and then we kind of kick the meetings off at 7, and we try to end by about 8:45, although we sometimes run a little long. And basically, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. The topic is gender, as we kind of alluded to. And the event is presented by the Freethinker Institute. I'm the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, Garrett Lang, and I guess we're going to have presentations, not presentations, but sort of brief conversations on a perspective or perspectives on gender from first myself, and then Jeffrey, then Ms. Fawn, and then Mr. Lee. And I guess I'll ask each of the people presenting to kind of introduce themselves before they present, and I'll do the same. And then, you know, when people are, we're going to try to keep the presentations short so that we can like give a lot of time for conversation, but I'll probably run a little longer. I think Ellis had scheduled for 2 minutes, but I think I might be a little longer than 2 minutes, and it's okay if other people are as well. But with 4 of us presenting there, it's not going to take too long. But basically, or maybe the 2 minutes was for social. Actually, I could be confusing things. So in any event,
yes, Garrett, it's about 4 to 5 minutes for you all to get started, and then we'll go.
So we'll have like 10 minutes each then, so that'll be fine. So I'll fit into 10 minutes. So okay, good. I was
yeah, like 4 to 5 minutes each. Thanks.
Great. So basically, the Freethinker Institute is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower people through personal and professional development for members. And we really want to help people grow and develop. And we create free events on Tuesday evenings to transform wisdom into practical application to benefit people's lives. And we cover a wide variety of topics, usually things not taught in academia or industry. And we have a members group as well for those that like what we call the 5 intentions, which are personal growth and development, seeking truth, and to be the best version of yourself, seek truth and be fair. And then number 2 is to be transparent about who you are and what you believe, and listen to other people with an open mind. And then 3 is to increase your critical thinking skills so you can rely on them heavily. And then 4 is to increase happiness and decrease harm. And then 5 is an eagerness to give and receive love. And so those are what we call things that the 5 intentions, which we think people should be intending to do. You can go to our website. Ellis posted some information about the group if you want to see prior events, and by the way, I have 3 monitors, so I'm often looking in other directions. Sorry for the lack of eye contact for that reason. But if you want to see past events on different subjects or topics, we're still working on getting video editors to post them to YouTube. If anyone knows anyone that wants to do volunteer video editing, have them reach out to me. And basically, yeah, we're each going to share a perspective on gender. And then, you know, if people want to, you know, raise hands after the perspective shared, feel free to do that. We'll probably have like a limit to, you know, we want to limit comments and questions to like 1 thought at a time. And so if you have a question, just ask 1 question at a time. When you raise, each time you raise your hand, or limit to 1 comment, you know, 1 thought in a comment. And that way we move through questions more quickly, and we'll be limiting the amount of time to ask questions because we have 4 speakers. But then we'll have time at the end to ask questions to any of the people who presented, or just have general conversation. So basically, with that, I'll introduce myself. I'm the CTO, CPO for an ed tech company, and the founder president of a food tech startup called platerate.com. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and that culminated into being the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is intended to share good ideas amongst people and get people thinking more critically about the world and themselves. And in my spare time, you know, I'm doing the Freethinker Institute. Most of my time is spent working because I am kind of a workaholic. So that said, I'm going to sort of present a perspective on gender. And basically, I would say, just jumping into it, society has certain expectations of male and female genders. They're also, the gender that we're born with, and innate differences based on the gender we're born with, which I'll touch on a little bit. And then there's the gender that one identifies with, and then there's the gender that one has a sexual preference for. And I'm going to touch a little bit about all of those and a little bit more than that in my conversation or my presentation portion. And basically, I like to share my screen because I'm a very visual learner. And so for people who are visual, they can kind of read instead of listen to me, which is fine. People who are visual will probably prefer that. So basically, if you look at the two extremes of male and female on a line, I would argue that a person can fall anywhere between the line and even on multiple points on the line, or even a range on the line, in any one of those categories that I mentioned in terms of how you identify, how you were born, sexual preference, and societal preference. So I'll address those individually. An intersex person, which was formerly known as hermaphrodite, is actually got 2 points on the line because they have both male and female sexual organs, which essentially disproves that common nomenclature that there are only two sexes, because if you're both male and female, you're really more than just either male or female. You're different from one or the other. You're both. And so societal expectation of gender, traditionally, women were looked at as historically as housework, cooking, looking good. Men were the bread earners of the family and need to make money. I'm only going to touch on this. Supposed to be tough and emotionless, often with a sort of a general expectation that I would say borders on sociopathy. And I would say that these are all societal constructs and have nothing to do with innate attributes of men versus women. They're just historical trends that people have, followed for a long time. And I don't want to touch on them too much because I actually don't think they're very important. And modern society is mixing all that up in a very good way, I think. And then innate differences between genders. There are some innate differences. Men are stronger, faster, and build muscle more easily. These are also just generalizations. They're not cold, hard, fast rules. They're female bodybuilders that are much stronger than me. And then men are generally better at 3D spatial problems. Men are generally more aggressive and less agreeable based on the Big Five tests. And based on scientific studies, this is an article that shows some of the data that I'm talking about here. And then women are generally, actually, even though historically, like, people think women are more emotional than men, actually scientific studies show they're only barely slightly more emotional than men. So that's actually a common misunderstanding, that women are more emotional than men. And so that's maybe worth looking into for those who follow that stereotype. Transgendered people, I'm going to make the argument. We had another discussion on free will. I guess if someone agrees with my argument on free will, I would argue that I can logically show that we have an essence of ourself, or a spirit. And what I would say is that, and most religions think that we have a soul, which is more or less the same as what I call a spirit. It just has additional dogma associated with it. And what I would argue is that transgendered people essentially have a spirit that doesn't necessarily align with their birth gender. And it could be that, the gender that they identify with is anywhere on that spectrum, or even multiple places on that spectrum. The first time I learned about that was from Fawn, actually, and I'll let her tell her story. But yeah, so I would argue that transgendered people just they are born with a spirit that has a different gender than necessarily the one that they were born with. People who consider themselves gender fluid, I would argue, are in the middle of that line, right between male and female, and so they can go back and forth in either gender. To address the 74 genders, gender studies people actually have 74 genders. Conservatives that I meet online love to make fun of this. I would argue that no one should be expected to memorize 74 genders. Like, it's a fine thing to have for a vocabulary for people who identify with something on that spectrum of, or on that those 74 genders. For the ones that I've read, they fall somewhere on the spectrum between male and female, or some combination thereof, which I described. But this is a vocabulary to help people vocalize how they feel about themselves. And so I think it's a good way for someone to transparently say, this is the gender that I identify with, and explain it to another person and give a name to it. And then someone else can listen with an open mind to understand that person better, and how they relate to themselves and how they identify themselves. A little piece of practical advice, I would argue that when someone says what their gender is and what gender they identify with, even if it differs from their birth gender, I recommend listening to them with an open mind, because you know, a lot of people say that people get to choose whether they're, you know, what their sexual preferences are or what their gender they identify with. You know, the truth is, like, to be anything other than CIS male or female, which means, like, you know, CIS male is born male and being attracted to females, and vice versa for CIS female. To be anything other than that is much more difficult in society. People get a lot of negativity from people for being anything else. So I would argue that we should listen with an open mind, that probably that person is not intentionally making their lives difficult. They probably really have the beliefs that they do about themselves, and we should take that as true until we find some good reason to believe that it's not true. And so I would argue that you know, we should accept people for who they are, rather than judge them for who they say they are. You know, we should trust that they say things about themselves transparently and honestly. You know, I think that would go a long way in sort of giving people the dignity to be who they feel like they are without judgment. So that's, I think, a quick version of what I wanted to present. I want to open it up to any questions people have. And Ellis, hopefully I didn't go too far over 4 minutes. I think I did. Any questions people have? Comments, concerns? Just raise your hand if you have questions so that we can keep organized in terms of order. There's for those that don't know, if you go to reactions at the bottom of the screen, or if you're on an iPhone, there, like under the 3 dots, there will be a thing called reactions, and then you can choose to raise your hand from there. If anyone's having difficulty, hopefully Ellis can help them in the chat. But hopefully that'll help people figure out how to raise their hands. Lois, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Okay, I'm still processing all this information. It takes me a while. My first question was, will you post this document somewhere we can access after the event?
Yes, I will post it in, and I literally just finished it a little while ago, but I will post it in the online community in the reference channel. So are you in Discord, Lois? I think you are, right?
Yes, I am.
Hear it. You can put it in chat too.
Okay, cool. So the question I had was under the intersex section. I caught a statement in here that says intersex people prove that there are not only 2 sexes, or something like that. I don't know the exact wording.
That it's not only male or only female exclusively is what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what I've found from intersex organizations is that they do not identify intersexuality as a 3rd sex, but rather that it's let me see, I want to get this right, but like it's a description of a biological condition, and there are intersex men and intersex women, and you know, they might identify with different kinds of genders, but it's separate. It doesn't say anything about like something more than 2 sexes itself. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I don't think what I'm saying disagrees with that. I might not have phrased it in the most politically correct way, and I apologize for that. Political correctness is not my strength.
No,
and I don't know. I haven't talked with intersex organizations about the right way to phrase it before this. All I mean is that's like a lot of people say people are either male or female, and they're born either male or female, and that's it. End of story. And all I'm saying is it's clearly more complicated than that because of intersex people who have the sexual organs of both men and, male and female sexual organs. And so I'm just saying it's more nuanced, it's more complicated people. And so what I tried to do with the rest of what I said is explain how I think it's more complicated, and that and so I hope that makes sense, Lois.
Okay, I think I know what you're saying. Thanks. I'll put my hand down.
Yeah, no problem. So and I forget your name. It was James. So James, go ahead.
Okay, so I
Sorry to interrupt. Can we
sort of have
close
a
the share
question.
screen?
Sorry,
Oh,
what's
Still
that?
got the share screen going.
Sorry about that.
Share screen. Still on.
I am sharing screen.
Okay. Sorry.
All right.
Please take
So
your share
Actually,
screen down so
I
you
can
see
take it off
people.
share screen if that's what you meant. Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. Sorry about that. So I have a question, and it's sort of one of my questions related to that. So you have a very easily distinguishable sex, gender, biology, identity. So that makes that much clearer when you say they're born with a biological gender. It does lend itself to confusion a little bit, but so you certainly answered that with the intersex question. The other question I had was that analytical philosophy is rooted in, from my understanding, very specific language. But does that include? Because I'm not an analytical philosopher in the slightest, but well, I try to be analytical. But so does that include defining terms during each discussion? So if we were to have a conversation about something that we weren't terribly familiar about, we could define a term for the sake of the discussion, not for the sake of dogmatic definition. Does that follow in analytic philosophy?
So I'm not an analytical philosophy expert either, so I don't want to claim to be. But I would say for the purposes of tonight's discussion, we do use dictionary definitions as a general guideline, and I did look up gender in the dictionary, and it basically says either male or female division of the species, especially as differentiated by social and cultural roles and behavior. So it leaves it kind of ambiguous, and so I tried to be more specific in my definition because I had 5 minutes, and then the dictionary has to be very pithy. So that's why I would argue they're not more specific. Now, with the internet, the dictionary could probably be 100 pages long and put all 72 genders in there, but like they don't do that. They keep the dictionary pretty pithy. So we try to get into a little more detail, and
There
we're
are
probably
not 72 genders, Garrett.
it's 72
There-
plus
there
male
is-
and
it's
female.
a multi-dimensional array that shows how people match up both their gender identity, their preferences, and other things. So
Yeah,
it winds up multi-dimensionally having lots of slots. It doesn't mean there are that many genders.
right.
Please
So I
don't
agree with
confuse
you.
people that way.
I agree with you, Fawn.
Garrett,
Yeah,
I think it's good that Miss Fawn, actually she was reading mine probably. Do you want her to go ahead and the others to say a little something so people have a variety of, or
yeah.
Miss
Why
Fawn,
don't, I mean, do you want to have everybody present before we take questions? Would that be better?
yeah, that was kind of the plan, but we
Oh,
can
I'm
take a
sorry.
little
I
bit
didn't
of
know that. I thought you wanted,
can,
like, I thought you wanted
no,
people
we can
to
take a
take
few
questions
questions in
after each person.
between
So
because there's a lot of people.
let's do that. I think that's better. So sorry that I took questions. We'll do the questions at the end after everybody's been able to present.
Oh, sorry, Garrett. I was it's good to take a couple in between, if you like, but we should get through the speakers.
Yeah, I
quickly.
agree. I think it's better to go through the speakers and then take all the questions at the end, if that's okay. So I think we were going to have Jeffrey go next. So Jeffrey, can you just introduce yourself and then kind of share your thoughts on gender?
Yeah. Thank you, and Alice, for inviting me. My name is Jeff Caldwell. I am the organizer of Connections Humanist Community. We're a community that meets online and in person in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and DC. I also work as a humanist hospice chaplain. I work with patients in their 80s and 90s who are facing death in nursing home facilities. And I'll be quick with this. My take on gender is I have a belief in gender equality. I believe that individual people are the best to judge their own kind of gender expression. So if someone, regardless of what they were born with, if someone identifies as female, I would say they're female. If someone identifies as male, I would say that, or any kind of, oh, sorry, I'm having some trouble with my USB hub. I believe the gender roles in terms of employment should be open. I've worked in the hospital with many amazing male nurses. And I know there's also females who work in traditional male roles like heavy industry. I think people should be allowed to pursue whatever career or job they, speaks to them. And I also believe in a level of egalitarianism in relationships. So I don't think gender roles should determine, traditionally we see women as more
in the conversation.
child-oriented.
Wait.
But I think some, in a relationship, if a male wants to tackle the majority of child rearing, or if females want to tackle traditionally male roles, I think as long as people are working together and trying to come to some agreement in their relationship, I think, regardless of roles, I think people should follow what makes them happy. Yeah, that's all I have.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Ms. Fawn, do you want to go next? And just go ahead and introduce yourself and then share your thoughts on gender.
Can anybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you well.
Oh, okay, because it just went dead when I had to turn off the alarm. Okay, I have a number of things to present, and I'm going to try to keep it short. To begin with, let me introduce myself. My legal name is Satempia Falling Tree, and I'm generally known as Fawn because people have difficulty pronouncing the Native American name. I am not Native American, but I was adopted by the shaman of the Kiowa Nation. And she gave me all three names. I consider myself to be two-spirit, or as my grandmother, the shaman who adopted me, would say two-soul, because she actually believed that we each have, that we have, people like us have two souls in one body. Very briefly, let me say that as a two-spirit within Native American communities, there are special social and spiritual roles. So there are, for example, spiritual ceremonies that are held specifically for two spirits. And when it comes to issues where there needs to be negotiation or mediation between the sexes, the two-spirit is often called in. We often serve as wise counselors to the tribe and as educators. And one of the more interesting aspects, Native American communities tend to have very well-defined and rigid gender roles, but we can do men's work or women's work. We go hunting or go to war with the men. We can grind corn or weave blankets or, do whatever, which is most unusual within the community. Now, that's describing where I am, and I consider myself, my gender, I describe, first of all, my presentation is trans feminine, meaning that I grew up in a male body, but my presentation is female. But my gender is two-spirit. That's one of the reasons why I say there aren't that many genders. The genders can be described, and then there are other things that get layered on top. For example, how do we present ourselves? What's the difference between gender and sex? for example. Gender is an internal construct. Sex is your reproductive organs, and sometimes they are ambiguous. Sometimes the doctors don't know how to pronounce at birth, and it's not necessarily a case of intersexuality. It's just genuine ambiguity that's not resolved, sometimes even until puberty. There are all kinds of different hormonal syndromes that can affect the development of the fetus that makes things rather complicated. But I looked up a number yesterday, 98% of the world's population are pretty much the same. Their gender and their sex are pretty much the same thing. There's no differences. Maybe as many as 2% of us, maybe 3% tops, that are gender nonconforming, that because we're either intersex, transgender, or some other alternative gender. Okay, now the final point I wanted to make, and this is something that I'm presenting for the first time, I just discovered in the last 36 hours a book published in 2006 called The Female Brain. And one of the interesting things that this book does, it's the first book to lay out research into the difference between men and women, and specifically what happens in the female brain due to rewiring, due to hormonal changes and so forth. And it should be noted that a lot of things that we have, let's say, argued were just socialization. The way men behave, the way women behave, the socialization, women gathering groups and chattering together. This turns out to be a biological necessity. When the fetus comes into existence, it's female until the first hormone drop. And the weird thing that happens if there's a Y chromosome is that it's going to be a boy, and or probably at least look like a boy. And of very extensive wiring in the hippocampus is going to be destroyed to make room in the amygdala and other areas in the brain for things that are specifically male behaviors, specifically aggression and sexual drive. Those areas of the brain in the male are like 5 times larger than they are for a woman. And the hippocampus, which is where a lot of the emotional understanding that women have is located, is like twice as large in men in general. This is, we don't know this unless we light you up with an MRI, functional MRI, or some other technology, or your autopsy later on. So things can be more complicated than we thought, because specifically the female brain, the succession of estrogen and progesterone and other hormones in the body are constantly changing the size of the hippocampus and amygdala in a woman throughout the month. But in general, a woman has a much greater need to communicate and to be part of a group than men do. So this is not this can be changed by socialization, but and there are other interesting aspects in there. I can't go through them all, and I'm not going to try.
Ms. Fawn, that was wonderful to get us started. So we'll have more from you later on as well. So let's go to Mr. Lee, and then we'll get some questions.
Ellis, if I could just ask Ms. Fawn, there was a request in the chat, Ms. Fawn, for the name of the book. If you don't mind typing it into the chat.
Good idea.
And then yes, let's definitely go to Mr. Lee. And by the way, we did not, out of the opinions of the speakers, we did not choose a statistically representative sample of America's cross-section of beliefs. We just chose a couple of people that wanted to speak about the subject, just to be clear. So I don't want to misrepresent anything there. So But Mr. Lee, Reverend Lee, I'm excited to hear your perspective as well. So if you could share with us, and you gave an intro earlier, but feel free to reintroduce yourself for the people that joined, and then share your opinion.
Hi, I'm Pastor Timothy Lee, preaching the gospel of good news at a Presbyterian church in New York. I try to present a Christian view on gender, quoting the Bible. The God's account of creation of man and the first family is in the book of Genesis. God created heaven and earth and created man in the sixth day. And God saw that everything was good. And God blessed the man and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and dominate it, rule over the creature." But God saw man being alone. It is not good for a man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And God had him asleep and took Adam's rib and filled in her with the flesh and brought her to Adam. And Adam was greatly overjoyed, happy with the woman. And the Bible says, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. God's creative purpose for man was to dominate the world and have a family consisting of a man and woman who become one flesh, who are mutually supporting each other. That is the plan and the design of God's creation of a man and female in his image. And God blessed the man's first family to help each other. This is an account of God's creation, and he created both male and female, created equal with the gender equality, being made good and wise and be able to do good and live under the blessing of God eternally. Man is a representative name for human being. When you say man in the Bible, it includes both male and female. God blessed the man and gave him commission to dominate the creature and rule over the world. But accident happened in the Garden of Eden when Satan tempted the woman with the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And Eve was deceived by Satan, and who said, "You will not die when you eat that fruit, but you will become wise as God." When Eve ate the forbidden fruit and gave it to Adam, they both ate, and by their disobedience to God, as a result, they fell into sin. And as a consequence of sin, God declared the judgment on them. Adam, you have to work hard to eat your bread every day. To Eve, I will make your pain to your childbearing. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. In this way, gender inequality has created. And then women become subject to her husband. A Jewish tradition retained the notion of a male superiority and a female submission. And Jewish tend to favor man over woman. Man can divorce while woman cannot choose to divorce man. Economically, woman depends on man. She doesn't own property unless there is no son born to her father. God made a covenant with the man and let the man execute the requirement of the law, leading his wife and children. Women received less religious duty as men, but their primary role is to maintain household duty, managing housework, and taking care of children. There were traditionary roles for Jewish women experiencing gender inequality. But things have changed since Jesus Christ came and redeemed his people from the punishment of sin and curses. Jesus became cursed for us when he did not sin. He received the punishment instead for us when we should have received the punishment of sin. And Christ has freed us from the bondage of slavery to sin and Satan. Whoever believes Jesus' sacrificial death for his sins, for our sin rather, and receive him as a savior, is delivered from the curse of sin and death. This is the good news of Jesus, which we call
Mr. Lee.
gospel.
Mr. Lee, thank you so much. That covered a lot in the Bible, and you brought it to Jesus as well. So thank you so much for your position. So
Excuse me, I didn't come to 5 minutes. One more sentence is left.
Okay, one more, yeah,
Very
okay.
important one.
Yes, and then
Very
that will be
important one. And Christian, the Apostle Paul says, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. In Christ Jesus, you are all children of God. And to God, there is only male and female. And there is a biological gender, which is identified by chromosome. So we are given destiny. God created every life. We all come from God, who created life. So the 64 gender, those things are man's preference and sexual disposition, and they are all learned second choice that the individual may choose to try to identify himself and show his preference. But we cannot change our destiny. That is but compared to Islam country, which is treating women harshly, the Christian church is giving the tremendous freedom and the privilege to women. So now the Christian.
Okay, Mr. Lee, thank you so much for that. But we have to go to, I guess, comments now. And for anybody, our speakers here can add to the conversation, so they'll all raise their hands. But we'll start with the comments about 2.5 to 3 minutes each, and you're welcome to address any of the speakers or make your own comments.
And I just want to thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm sorry, Pastor Lee. You had a different opinion than some of the rest of us, but I want to thank you for sharing it transparently so that we get a diversity of opinions. That's all helpful in dialogue. So with that said, Michael Strasberg has been very patiently waiting with his hand up. I don't know if you had a question a long time ago and are ready to ask it.
No, I just have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was in the Army 1982 to 85, and there was a gay guy in my unit, a very, very good soldier. I was an officer, and this guy, I'm a very gentle person. This guy came out to me. I'm straight, but he came out to me knowing he could trust me, and he told me how miserable he was. He wanted to have a military career. He wanted to serve his country. He wanted to get the military education. He wanted to get the military pension. He wanted to be a patriotic American. And he felt that he was being discriminated against unfairly and illogically because of his sexual preference. It caused him a great deal of pain. And in my opinion, not accepting people for the sexuality that they have is a great disservice to them and a great disservice to our society. And that's the only thing I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I think that the policy was that gay people were not allowed in the military. Is that true, Michael?
That is true. In fact, my commanding officer asked me, I'm not going to say the guy's name. He said,
no, don't.
He said, is this guy gay? I said, I don't know. He said, well, if he is gay, I want to know, because that's a stain in my home and the Army is my home.
Got it. And actually, I think it's an objective fact that is discrimination, right? That's discrimination based on sexual preference, which is actually illegal in the workplace. But now I don't know whether or not that's changed in the military since then, but that would technically be discrimination, like objectively speaking.
It has changed in the military, but even after I got out of the military, I had friends who were still in the military,
Mm-hmm.
and they would talk about it, the new rule, as being fag appreciation policy. That's how they termed it.
Got it. What did that mean? Maybe I don't have it. So
the policy, don't ask, don't tell, where your sexuality was irrelevant,
right,
meant that we were all supposed to appreciate fags.
Got it. Okay.
In the military.
Still a lot of discrimination, but technically not allowed to. And I think even don't ask, don't tell sort of says you're not allowed to transparently say what your sexual orientation is, or you're not allowed in the military. So it sounds like there still is discrimination. It's just that people are allowed to lie about it, about their sexual orientation, to stay in the military if they want to, and want to not be transparent about who they are. They can still be in the military as long as they don't say that they're gay.
Yes.
Don't ask, don't tell has been rescinded. It was rescinded under Obama administration, and I believe that it is now open as to sexual preference. In fact, the Army is even paying for for gender affirmation affirming surgery. In other words, if you believe that you're transgender and you're in the Army, they will pay for your surgery. So a lot of things have changed in the last 10, 15 years.
This was 40 years ago.
Yeah, oh no, I understand.
Yeah.
And I know plenty of vets who were thrown out because they were lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it has changed.
Great. So with that, I want to let Will go because we have a bunch of hands up.
Thanks, Garrett.
Sure. Good to see you.
I just wanted, thank you very much. Just this view of Reverend Lee. I mean, this sort of not prehistoric, but it's a doctrine that's come out of, what was it, the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, the Middle Ages. That God created man, and then he gave man was lonely, so he created a woman for man. From the rib of Adam was produced Eve, and homosexuals are evil. I mean, I find it extremely offensive, but very indicative of the problem today with these sort of fanatical evangelical religions that are usually extremely right-wing as well, conservative. Ironically, they're usually the most right-wing proponents of morality, and they cause the most suffering, the greatest incidence of suicide. The highest demographic is homosexual and transgender adolescents. They're very vulnerable, they're very sensitive, and then you've got this sort of view that's supposed to be under the banner of Christ, and they're making life miserable for people, and I think it's disgraceful. And they should wake up to themselves. And if they're really believing Jesus, spread a bit of love and forget all this absolute utter rubbish about gender.
So Will, I know you're passionate about this, but I want to encourage everyone. Our only rule.
Oh, that's okay. That's it. Finish.
I want to encourage everyone, if you don't mind me making an example, Will, I just want to encourage everyone to like be as polite as possible, and rather than, you know, use words like disgraceful, just say, I disagree with this and this is why, just to keep the language less emotionally laden. I value your opinion a lot, Will, and you know that, but I want to have things expressed in a way that lets everyone think very clearly about the subject without getting emotional about it. So that's all. And I know this is it can be a very emotional topic, and some of these can be like, you know, like people's opinions can be very offensive. And let's just try not to be offended and talk politely and rationally about it rather than being offended about it, if that makes sense. So with that said, Robert, let me let you go next.
Hi. Yeah, Caster Semenya, she was a South African athlete who competed in the female middle running distances. And I've read multiple articles about this person. And there was always this aspect that there was so much confusion about her gender. Well, none of these articles, until I finally found some, basically found out that her genetics are basically, she has an X and a Y chromosome. So she is male by genotype. I've got to say, I think this idea of having 74 genders is a little bit crazy. I mean, is it 35? Is it 110? I mean, every single mammal on the planet has a reproduction based on male and female. Yes, there are masculine women and feminine women and masculine men and female men. You know, there is a bell curve of each characteristic on that whole 5 panel of psychological characteristics, the openness, conscientiousness, and so on. We talk about abnormalities. There's Turner syndrome, where there's an X and an O, meaning they have a single chromosome. They don't have 2 chromosomes. There's Klinefelters who have XXY. They have the crime chromosome, which is XYY. These are all genetic errors in fertilization of the egg. Now you talk about hermaphrodite as a separate sex. Hermaphrodites are basically have 46 chromosomes. They're XX, but they lack the SRY gene, which is responsible for triggering normal kind of sexual secondary characteristics. So I reject the idea that hermaphrodites represent another gender. Ms. Vaughn talked about, I think I got her name right. She talked about there are clearly male and female differences. And there's like 6.5 times more gray matter in the male brain. And there's about 11.
Not what I said. Not what I said.
Well, no, I'm just saying that you were talking about differences in brains. I'm just commenting that there's differences in the white and gray matter distribution between male and females. So that's pretty much it. I think that this idea that you have 74 categories or whatever is just a taxonomy that's based on no science. It's based on feelings. This is not to say anything about gay or lesbian or bisexual things. These are all sexual preference issues. But as far as gender, I think there's 2.
Great, thanks, Robert.
There's gender identity, which is strictly internal. How can you say that there are only 2 forms of identity?
Because there's a genetic foundation for our gender, and it's determined by our X and Y chromosomes and the subsequent protein synthesis triggered by genes and secondary.
Yes, and you also, and then you knowing all of this also know that the sequencing of hormones during fetal development and later on during child development also affect the structure of the brain. It does not guarantee only two forms of identity.
Of course not. As I mentioned, for every characteristic, for openness, for extroversion, there is a whole bell curve distribution, and the male bell curve distribution tends to be peaking more toward the aggression side and female less, but there's huge overlap. There's clearly women who are much more aggressive than female and men who are much more feminine than men, but
yeah.
I guess, Robert, I presented the idea that birth gender could differ from gender that one identifies with versus gender that one has a sexual attraction to. Do you recognize those as differences and valid differences?
I think that an individual can have different gender preferences, but I think there is a again, it's just a spectrum.
Yeah, it is a spectrum, and that's what I described, is that it's a spectrum from male to female across all three of those different, actually four, because you include societal expectation as another one, although I don't find that one super useful, because it, yeah, but yeah, it is a spectrum, and I would argue people can be at any point and any, or even multiple points on that spectrum. Does that make sense and resonate with you, Robert?
Yes, yes,
Cool.
yes.
Cool.
But if a person has,
Hey, Nancy.
if an individual has male genes,
Hello?
if X and Y genes, and
Sorry, I think someone is not on mute, and I'm trying to figure out who. Go ahead, Robert.
I guess I lost my train of thought, but basically, if a person has X and Y genes, their gender identity may be anywhere, but I wouldn't describe that as a different gender. I would describe that as a sexual preference and personality characteristics. Maybe it's just a semantic difference.
Yeah, I think for me that it becomes semantic, as long as you recognize the difference between being able to be attracted to different, like different types of people and et cetera, then that's for me the salient part. That said, I want to let Liz make her comment or ask her question. I do want to encourage everyone.
One more comment. If a person has an X and Y gene and they have male sex secondary characteristics and they identify female, I will call them by whatever name they want, and I will treat them as a female, but I won't think for 1 second they are a female, because they're not. In other words, trans females are not real females, which this is something that, that Martina Navratilova and some other people have come out and said, and they've been just castigated for these very rational opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is like, in like sports, you shouldn't necessarily have trans females competing with born females. And the example that was given to me was like mixed martial arts, where you have, trans females that just completely destroy, people who were born as female, because they're so much stronger competing against people that just don't have the body mass. And that gets into a more complex and nuanced subject than any of us talked about in our presentations. But if we want to delve into that, someone can ask questions about it. But that said, I want to let people with their hands up go. So Liz, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. So I was also grateful to you, Pastor Lee, for sharing your opinions, but obviously also found it a bit provoking. And I think one thing that I'd like to lean into is that you ended saying that the delineations between the dominator and the dominated, they are biological and we can't change our destiny. And I think, I'd really like to unpack a little bit this idea of social identity and gender identity and where it comes from. And I think it really starts with us solving our problems as humans, right? You know, our most basic issues are survival and then caretaking and family caretaking. So, you know, back in the day when we were living much closer to the land, you know, we are first and foremost priority is always to get our needs met for shelter and water and food, etc. And so our partnership was really playing to each person's strengths. Biologically, there's differences. And so, you know, going out and getting food and hunting and gathering from what you're calling the dominator, and then nursing children and being more homebound for the women, that was really sort of that, you know, biologically based delineation as we're living just a little bit, you know, before electricity and infrastructure and running water and the things that we have today. And so, you know, now we're kind of moving into an environment that is empowering us to solve that partnership conversation for caretaking in new ways. And I think that, you know, technology and infrastructure have probably evolved faster than our mindset has been able to catch up. Because in addition to just solving these problems physically, there's also this emotional sense of value, right? Like how we are being able to transact in value with each other. And, you know, when I think about friction and tension, it's really there, you know, especially in this conversation when we talk about family and caretaking, you know, we as women were able to give birth and men, you don't have that. And so I guess, you know, as a woman who has definitely felt a lot of pressure from the glass ceiling and, you know, just wants to show up and be able to give to society and be my best self, but also, you know, not be stunted in my growth and take on leadership and have, you know, financial independence and getting a certain amount of pushback there. I'm kind of wondering also, you know, I'm surrounded by a panel of men, like, you know, what for you is potentially, or what do you see from other people around you that might be threatening to your sense of value by women, you know, gaining more independence or moving up the ladder, or, you know, is this something that you have any echoes that you could share on from your point of view?
Who are you asking, Liz?
Well, I'm just asking the crowd if there's, you know, a woman being able to gain leadership or, you know, be paid equal. You know, we've got gaps, statistical gaps that we are, you know, that exist in our society, and that's reflective of a certain mindset. And so I guess I'm just wondering if anyone has anything to contribute in terms of, you know, if a woman were to be your boss or, you know, move up in leadership or be, I don't know if there's any, maybe I'm not phrasing it very, very well. Maybe I should, you know, think about the way that I'm posing my question, but just, I guess from like a man's point of view in terms of, you know, wondering where you guys think that friction might be in terms of women sort of moving up the corporate ladder or gaining more independence, and what friction you might be seeing from how that might be impacting or creating fear or pushback in the male psychology as it exists right now.
I guess I'll just,
yeah, if I can answer
yeah, go ahead, Pastor Lee.
The unlike Islam country where women are treated harshly by the law and the norms of a society influenced by religion, the Christian country like the US is allowing women to be all that they may want to be. You can be all, the Supreme Court judge or the CEO of the big corporation or the athlete, whatever, you know, there is no limit. And the only thing that is weaker than the man is your physical strength. Okay, so that's why we call women are weaker sex. Women are weaker sex. But you can do all things that man can do and achieve in the Christian country.
And actually, Liz, when I was doing research for tonight's event, one of the articles that I came across tried to scientifically support that women make better leaders than men, even though men are historically the leaders. And the idea that women have a higher agreeableness level sort of supports that in modern research in some ways. And I'm sure they had other, I didn't get to read the whole article in detail, but it was an interesting thing to come across. And I would argue that the lower aggressiveness would also probably make war less likely under female leadership than under male leadership. So although wars are getting less likely historically compared to historical time periods, but always room for progress. So additional progress, let's put it that way. That said, anyone else want to respond to Liz, or can we go on to Mike's question, because we have a lot of hands up? Maybe we'll go on to Mike's question if that's okay, Liz.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for your question. Mike, go ahead. Good to see you.
Comment that the 95 different sexes came from the Facebook drop-down menu and included things like non-binary and metrosexual, and they gave you 95 choices when you signed up to Facebook if you're a recent sign-up. Most of us have signed up relatively recently, relatively a long time ago, but a new signer gets that. Now, progress and problems all occur at the edges and civilization. And so some of the, I think most people, including fundamental Christians, agree that it's a private decision. But should a public school system be a social engineering laboratory? Should we have, if a child, a 7-year-old child wants gender reassignment surgery, should the teacher or counselor help that child directly or involve the parents? The issue about locker room, should a biological male be allowed free access to the women's locker room? And these are the kind of things at the edges that get in there. I think the military issue is you do sign away some of your rights when you join the military in exchange for certain privileges. And that, I think it's maybe okay, even though it's a trauma, to tell a recruit that male or female, bi, trans, or whatever, that it's not a dating lobby. You should, it may not be don't ask, don't tell, but it shouldn't be a chance to recruit people to your philosophy. Shouldn't be a laboratory to so the issue about what occurs, progress and problems occur at the edges. And when a biological male wants to join the women's swim team, that's a complex ethical problem. And I think at that point, I think I'll yield the balance of my time and just to throw those out for possible comment. Thank you.
So I want to encourage everyone just to try to stick to one thought and topic at a time so that we can reply to that topic, and then raise your hand another time if you have more than one thing to cover. Mike, as far as 7-year-olds getting gender reassignment from schools, if you have an article of that happening, I would love for you to post it. I've never heard of anything like that. Anyone underage needs to get their parental approval for anything like a gender reassignment. So I don't think that gender reassignment happens from schools. It only happens with the approval from the parents. As far as the military thing, unless you have an article showing otherwise, Mike, which feel free to post it in the chat. As far as military, you mentioned that the military is not a way to recruit other people to your philosophy, but I would argue like being gay and deciding to sign up to the military doesn't mean that they're recruiting gay people in the military. It just means that like the story that Michael gave, a gay man wanted to serve in the military and be a member of our military fighting for freedom in our country. And although that's not what the military always does these days, but that's what the intent of it is, right? Is to fight for freedom. And I guess as far as like, recruiting people to your philosophy, I've never heard gay people that I know trying to convince anyone to be gay. All they do is say, if you're gay, we'll accept you and we'll support you as a fellow gay person. But I've never heard anyone try to recruit anyone as being gay. And I think that's a common misunderstanding, that a lot of people, have this belief that gay or trans people are trying to recruit people to be gay or trans. And if anyone has an article showing evidence that there are gay and trans people recruiting people to be gay or trans, I would welcome you to post that in the online community or in the chat, but I'm not aware of those types of things happening. What I do see happening is people who come out as gay or trans being supported by the community from people who accept them for being honest about who they are. And that's a very different thing than recruiting people to be gay or trans. As far as recruiting people to our philosophy, that's what we're all doing when we share our opinions, right? We're all like sharing our philosophy to like tell other people that our philosophy is good, but ironically, gay and trans people don't do that about gay and trans. Like we do it about we do it about determinism and free will. We do it about everything. Like we're all kind of trying to convince other people we're right all the time. And I want to encourage people to share transparently beliefs without being attached to other people agreeing with it more, and keep it polite and non-emotional for that reason. That said, it was a long response because you brought up a lot of topics, and that's why I want to encourage people to just bring up one topic at a time or ask one question at a time. So that said, I want to let Remco go. Good to see you, Remco. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, hi, Garrett. And interesting topic. And I interrupted my breakfast here this morning because I have a question. And I think, why am I here? Why are we discussing gender? To me, gender is something that belongs in the Dark Ages. I hear people talking about 91 types of gender. It reminds me of a TED talk I listened to. They were saying 21 forms of happiness. And I thought, what nonsense is this? In my world, happiness doesn't exist, but that's another topic. I guess I've been radicalized by non-duality. But, when you look at gender, really, if you look objectively at gender, and if you're going to use Gaussian bell curves, there's often greater spread within each gender than there is between the gender. I don't see a point in maintaining the notion of gender. I know what my sex is. I don't have to promote it with a name or with any prefix to my name, like Mr. In India, they've outlawed the caste system, and yet in their census they ask, what caste you're from. You're preserving something. In the process, the moment you utter, you're preserving. And I think there are signs gradually in the world, in Sweden, where they're dropping the distinction between him and her. In Amsterdam, more recently, they're dropping the distinction between mother and father by calling them parents, so, it's father and mutter in Amsterdam. Sorry, my ethnicity comes out here. I'm Dutch and I'm biased. And I just think, look, it's time we stop this stereotyping. I made the mistake of naming my kids by their gender, but next time round, I'm going to give them gender neutral names, as my kids have done. I don't see a need. I am a person, and we're all just people. And we don't, we're endowed with different genitalia. Yes, okay. But does it have to be preserved in a name? Just like we're dropping the distinction between Mrs. Mrs. and Ms. You know, it's none of anybody's business whether you're married or not. We don't have to promote it. Likewise with a name. And I think we're preserving something that, you know, needs to go. And I think in that process of letting go, I think we're going to have a much healthier society, and allowing people to be themselves. I mean, do we have to distinguish by name based on physical strength? Well, that's what we're doing. If somebody was saying that's just one of the distinctions between male and female. So what? Anyway, that's my proof. Why am I here? Why are we discussing gender is my question, Garrett.
We're discussing it because it's very controversial, and thank you for your opinions, Remco. And I really want to just hone in on one phrase that you said, that let's let people be themselves. Let's let people be their authentic self. If someone says this is my authentic self, let's trust them as being honest. And yes, let's let them be themselves. Why try to tell someone who they are? They know who they are better than we know who they are. So let's let people be their authentic selves. I love that, Remco. So that said, I want to let James go next.
Thank you. So since the emphasis has been on people sort of identifying and actually using their own terminology and defining it quite well, even though it might conflict with other people's belief in what that terminology might mean on an objective level, it's perfectly clear how people are presenting. I am biologically born heteronormative male who is a strong ally, and I actually have been supportive of every LGBTQ plus community I've ever tried to encounter, in spite of having negative childhood experiences to that effect. But the reason that I came on today wasn't necessarily to point out that every individual's discussion with any other individual should be taken at its face value. You sort of, if you have someone who's very attached to terminology or culture, or they feel affronted by your redefinition of something, then you're obviously dealing with someone that's not flexible enough to have a rational conversation on the level that you want to. Which brings me to why I came today. The sort of presentation of people who just don't want to be forthcoming, and where do you feel, and I'm sort of asking the group because personally I am very accommodating to people that want to be subtle and that want to kind of work their way out of their shell with every individual that they want to interact with on that level. But at the same time, I feel like there should be some lines drawn. And that's sort of where I encountered some difficulty in this recent interaction I had, because what these people had done was they had actually redefined gender dysphoria, and I really appreciate Ms. Fawn's identity as two-souled, because they identified gender dysphoria. They presented with multiple gender interpretations, and what they were doing was, in my opinion, a trap. They were presenting themselves as a very ambiguous gestalt, sort of like an incomplete circle waiting for you to call it a circle, or a C, you know. And what I got out of the entire experience were these people are severely mentally ill and trying to project their mental illness in order to glean information that might be used against the person. And there was obviously some maligned intent with these people, and the reason I think it's so important that people have the liberty to define their terms is for that very reason. You have to meet people where they are, and if you can't explain yourself in a clear way, subtly, to a person, and be almost certain that they know what they're talking about, then you need to end the conversation, because you're drawing out the person who's seeking knowledge. You're making them jump forward through hoops that they are inclined to jump through just for the sake of living, just for the sake of knowledge and experience. And then before they know it, they're in this weird corner, this predicament where they feel like they've been trapped. And so the specific example I want to mention, which is not doxing in any way whatsoever, is that this individual used autism as a synonym for, it must have been a half dozen different identities or sexual preferences that I was attempting to interpret out of this person. And not that I was even interested sexually in this person. They were being overtly oppressive with their sexuality. And that's sort of what I wanted to, step out and say, hey, you have every right to be subtle. You have every right to, in my opinion, use not other cultures in Miss Fawn's case, because she's legitimate who she wants to be and who she says she is. But if you need to use our history or the animal kingdom or whatever it is you use, you need to be very clear, and you need to have integrity to use that level of subtlety. And then once it's clear to you, then you need to out yourself. Once you've gotten to that level with someone where you're like, wow, we're still having this conversation and you haven't started like gawking at me, I think I can come out to you. And that's where I think people are they're addicted to being that trap. It causes people to pay attention to them and engage with them in a way that they normally wouldn't. They're a mystery.
That's a great idea. I think Ms. Fawn wanted to speak next. Sorry, it's about, you can always raise your hand again. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm amazed that here we are, the transgender and gender non-conforming peoples of the world are a whopping 2% of the population, and we present such a problem to society, and I don't really get it. First thing is that gender, more than two genders, has been around for as long as there have been people. I know that within tribal societies, this goes back tens of thousands of years. It's only modern societies that have gotten rigid enough to say that there are only two genders, two identities associated with the two sexes. And even if you want to just hold to that and you don't want us to take all these different names, we're still only 2% of the population. The people that say, well, do we really want to give biological males access to the ladies' shower? That's not what's happening. There's not a single instance of this happening. It's just a way of scaremongering and creating a political issue. It's a way that politicians make a name for themselves by being cynical and by creating a problem that doesn't exist. Anyway, that's my point. And thank you.
Great. And if I can add 2 cents and agree with you, Ms. Fawn, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on this subject and there's a lot of fear. And that's why I want to keep things very polite so that we can talk rationally about it rather than emotionally about it. Because as soon as we leave the rational part of the brain, we start to, come to false conclusions. Whereas like reason, I think generally guides us right. it sounded, James, like you were speaking a lot of generalities. So I didn't really understand the exact scenario that you were in. All I would say is like, it sounded like you were afraid someone was trying to take advantage of you. And I'm sure that was intentional, but it sounded like you were saying someone was trying to take advantage of you. And all I would say is like, ask people questions when they say stuff that sounds suspicious, and, people share to the extent that they want to. And if you ask people questions and they don't have good answers, or they come up with inconsistent answers that show they were dishonest, then you learn that they're not trustworthy, right? And so that's where transparency and open-mindedness come in. Listen to them with an open mind, but with healthy skepticism, and only trust them to the extent that, only share with them to the, transparently to the extent that you trust them. And if you do those things, which is the second intention, I think you'll save yourself a lot of grief and being taken advantage of. And it sounds like you did that, which is great. But yeah, I want to let David go because he has his hand up and there are a bunch of hands up. So
the only thing I could add to this conversation to follow on, I believe it's Fawn who was talking about brain differences between men and women. And I mean, yeah, I have an interesting history. I worked as a registered nurse, primarily with women, of course, because most registered nurses are women. And then I also worked in the totally male stock market. So the difference of the intercommunication or interpersonal relationships was quite striking between those two rather extreme areas of work. So that it led me to conclude that it's not only physical differences, there are profound biological differences in the brain which causes, it's not, I don't believe it's social. I believe it's, well, it's partially social. As most things in psychology, it's hard to, take either as purely genetic, say, or purely environmental. But I would argue that there's a strong genetic component to the interaction between women as compared to the interaction between men. And then there's a social overlay. But there is definitely a difference that I thought was more than just social overlay. That's my only point.
Very well observed.
Agreed. We have a lot of hands up, so I'm going to let Robert go next.
Hi, sorry, it's Ellis.
Oh, Ellis, yeah, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, it's actually about 8:25. So what I'd like to do is, if any of our speakers have a final comment, like maybe 2 minutes or whatever, Jeffrey, Mr. Lee, Garrett, and Ms. Vaughn, and then we'll just continue. Also, anybody who has not raised their hand, now is a good time to do it because the time is going to go quickly. And I guess we'll continue with comments after in case you all had anything last words to say.
Yeah, why don't we go in reverse order that we spoke so that we let Pastor Lee go first. If you have any final comments, Pastor Lee, and then Robert and Will, if you don't mind, I'm going to let Bella go once we get back to the hands because she hasn't spoken yet. So we're going to start giving priority to people that raise their hands that haven't spoken yet. And if I miss anyone that hasn't spoken yet, Ellis, call me out on that because you have better notes than I do.
Yeah. God loves man. God bless the man. And he wants all of you to prosper and be happy. And God created male and female for them to multiply, reproduce, and fill the earth and be happy and make a happy family. And the sexual identity may be developed during the course of lifetime of individual, but God has determined the human sex, male or female, and the chromosome. And you may develop different kind of sexual orientation or preference, but it's all learned behavior. But the question is, are we gonna be a Christian, save the people, saved person, happy in the Lord? Or are we continue to disobey the God's created order? God created the male and the female, just as if he created the animal species and the vegetation. And we belong to this category of man. So we don't want to go against the will of God, because the God is the final judge. We all stand before a God in terms of our moral living. So you may follow your desire, your sexual lifestyle, but that doesn't count when you come to God finally. So we need to obey God and understand our destiny. That's all.
Great, thank you, Pastor Lee. And
so Garrett, maybe I think Jeffrey and Ms. Fawn are just going to say their final statements. You can too, and then we'll just continue with comments till the end.
yeah, I wanted to just go to Ms. Fawn next.
Well, I don't know that I have much to add. I know that for myself, I am following what I believe the Creator, say God, I would say Great Spirit, wants me to be doing. I take guidance from my Jewish heritage, Native American, Buddhist, and Taoist, and I do my best each day to function as a healer for others with the many gifts that I've been given. And, you know, I just try to be the person that I know I'm supposed to be. And it's not male or female, it's two spirits, two souls. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Fawn. And Jeffrey. Jeff, sorry.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I would just stress the importance of kind of valuing, you know, our individuality, valuing that, you know, we're products of evolution over the course of millennia, that biology is, I don't think, is ever black and white. There's always a lot of variation. There's always a lot of change. And I think as a society, you know, I think the values of a society is allowing everyone to kind of flourish, you know, as they see fit. So I think people have a right to define themselves, to define their own gender identities and their own sexual preferences. Yeah, and I think I appreciate that.
And then for myself, I guess, you know, I think I believe in God as well, although I think that God or his servants or her servants, potentially, if God has a sex, I don't think that they do. But I think that God or their servants decides whether a male spirit is born into a female body or whatever other combination happens. So for me, the way to honor God is to honor humans as they see themselves, not limiting themselves to the gender that they were born with, but honoring them for the one that they identify with. And for me, that's the way to honor God and to the individual themselves as well. That said, I want to let we lost the Bella. You didn't want to ask your question or make your comment. Did we scare you away?
No, I just kind of got lost in the whole mix, but just briefly,
Yeah.
You know, as someone who's a notorious tomboy with a very religious mother who tried to, you know, and try to force me to certain gender roles, and had a very long time as a child, had, you know, confusion over my gender. You know, like I wanted to be a man for a long time because I thought, well, men are able to do everything and women were going to have to be stuck at home cooking and cleaning, and I didn't want that for my life. But thankfully, you know, I'm in a society now where gender roles have been expanded. Women are, you know, allowed to do a lot more than the traditional biblical role of what that is. And while I'm not against Christianity, I do appreciate the fact that I'm able to explore the side of me. And I've always questioned, well, why am I this way? Why am I'm more of a masculine woman as opposed to a more feminine one? And I mean, to me, I just think that my mother had me in her 40s and maybe her testosterone levels were higher. But, you know, just quickly on the topic, I do believe there are biological realities that we can't ignore. There are some black and white issues. And I do believe there's two biological sex. I do think gender can be on a continuum. But as long as women are going to be the ones having children, and that becomes a biological reality, then there's behaviors that, whether we like it or not, are going to have to play out. And though I do agree with Ms. Vaughn that this issue of transgender is really rare and affects a very small percentage of the population, our culture, as far as how we view gender, has really gone widespread. And the roles of women have really changed fundamentally our culture and how our roles are. And this is creating a lot of confusion. You know, a lot of my male friends are complaining, I don't even know how to relate to women. I don't even know what they want. I don't know how to seduce them or get them to fall in love with me. And women have changed a lot as well. And I don't know if they really are honest with themselves, and that, yeah, our roles have expanded, but there's still a lot of biological incentives for our behavior. So for example, if you're a woman and you want to have children, you are going to be attracted to a male with resources. There's going to be hormones like oxytocin that's going to affect your behavior. Even birth control has been known to affect a woman's behavior and how she desires certain types of men. And these are biological realities. And so how are we going to merge our biological realities with our new freedom, our gender role freedom in this culture? Because there are a lot of confusions, and I think a lot of people are confused on how to treat the genders and how they could get certain successful outcomes. So this is something I kind of wanted to explore, and how are we going to, because, as people say, someone said about progress creates a lot more problems. And so how are we going to resolve some of our biological imperatives with our new social contracts, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Does anyone else want to answer that, or should I take a shot at it? Go ahead, Ms. Vaughn. Do you want to try to respond to that?
Well, no, I think that she's right on. I would make a slight distinction about what we've been talking about. The women's lib movement, which began, the modern women's lib movement, which began in late 50s, early 60s, really opened things up for women and gave them a lot more opportunities, for which I, for one, am very, very glad. I don't necessarily associate that expansion with gender, but I think maybe it is. I think maybe Bella is right that it is kind of a change in the way we want gender to play out, that women want more opportunities. But the biological thing, like the glass wall, why aren't there more women scientists? Well, science tends to be an individualistic thing where people tend to work alone. And women have a biological need, or not all women, but in general, women want to be with others. So science, math may not be the best choice for them. At a certain point, they holding another, I was really amazed that holding another baby can trigger the mommy mind. That's how sensitive the brain can be to this. And at that point, a woman wants to have a family and wants to have her profession. And we as a society haven't figured out how to make that viable. I mean,
Great,
I think
thanks.
that's the open question.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I commented on how the societal expectations of male versus female, I think, have been largely disrupted by the women's lib movement to positive effect, where people can choose to do what they want to do, right? And don't have to feel limited to gender expectations societally, which I see as a really good and freeing thing. And it sounds like, Bella, that positively influenced you. That said, I want to let Robert go.
Yeah, I think the last two comments were very insightful, and I think they were good. Maybe the young lady who spoke before really did encounter a glass ceiling, but I don't see it. And what I see is that in law school and med school and graduate degrees and such. Women are outpacing men. There's more men and there's more women in law school, medical school, more of them getting graduate degrees. This idea that this idea that that women are paid less, I really take issue with. I think these statistics, the 78% is invalid. It doesn't take into account career choice. It doesn't take into account hours worked, educational attainments, years in a profession, and doesn't take into account risk. I mean, most taxi drivers and policemen and Alaskan fishermen and telephone linemen who are trying to restore power and telephone to in icy New England. These are all male-dominated forces, and I think that women are free individuals in a free society, and they make decisions that they are less concerned about wealth and power. They're more concerned about lifestyle. I've seen many cases around me over the years where a woman who was just whip smart, who just slams college, slams med school, goes into medicine and gets into her 30s, and she wants to take yoga lessons, and she wants to have children, and she wants to have a balanced life. And these women tend not to be the workhorses in medicine. They tend not to be the workhorses in law. Clearly, that's an exaggeration to some degree, but proportionally, it's true. This idea that men have it better off really doesn't fly. I mean, men are much more likely to commit suicide, much more likely to be the victim of a homicide, much more likely to be homeless, more likely to be in dangerous professions, and they make over 90% of the prison population. So men don't have it so great either. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Robert. And I think this is a really complicated issue, and I don't know that we're going to get to the point of, like gender equality, which we didn't really aspire to try to do tonight. But I will say you're bringing up a lot of good points about that could explain the gender gap where societal expectations still are more around men being the bread earners. And so I know examples in my life of, men that, work harder because they know that they have to be the bread earner, and women who, even if they are the bread earner, want better work-life balance. And these are personal decisions. And I don't think that, they're easily solved or resolved. And I don't think we'll have time, and I haven't done the research. The last time I looked up the wage gap, I don't think it took into account the research on the wage gap didn't take into account the different professions that people go into, et cetera, et cetera. And there are some professions that, like teachers and social workers and nurses was brought up, that are much more predominantly female, that are lower paid. And I wonder if some of that explains some of the wage gap. I do think there are a lot of people that still are biased and have a preference for men or women. And I think it goes both ways. Some people have a preference to work with women, but I don't have any clear read on who's favored or et cetera, et cetera. It's complicated. That said, I want to let Will go next.
Thanks, Garrett. I was just thinking when Miss Thorne was saying how only 2% of the population have got gender fluidity or I don't know about homosexuality. I think it's about 10% of the population, but 2% of gender fluid, yet they creating such a furor. And I thought this just demonstrates how small-minded human beings are. I mean, the planet is on the brink of game over with climate change, like literally, like it could all be over if we don't address climate change. There are wars breaking out everywhere. There's extreme poverty in the world. There's so much suffering abounds, yet we're all worried about people, a bloke who wants to wear a dress. It's just, you know, and these religious fanatics that say, oh, it's all about humans and God created man. Meanwhile, we've destroyed the planet and all the magnificent species that exist. And humans are just like this poison that have just ruined the joint. And the God boys are going, oh, but God says you must not wear a dress. You know, it's just ludicrous. It's infantile and it's demonstrative of how we ruined the planet in the first place. These small-minded pea brains. Thank you very much.
Well. let's not get emotionally Latin language if you could. So
pea brain's pretty tame. Pea brain's pretty tame. I push my luck. Okay,
yeah. So Lois, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so a few comments. I do agree with Remco, and he said, or they said, I don't know if you want to, what pronouns you want to use neutral ones, but anyway, Remco said that we don't need gender nowadays. I agree with that, but I think maybe for different reasons. And also I disagree with the idea of removing words like mother, father, brother, sister. Humans did not have a concept of gender or a name for this until the 20th century. And before that, gender was used for for words. A lot of languages have different genders for different words. And then of course the gendered words, he, she, stuff like that. It was only in the 20th century that it began to be applied to social roles and social identities. But I think that it is important to keep our notions of sex differences intact. And I'll give an example. So right now, I am pregnant, and that and I know that my experience of parenthood as a mother is biologically very different than the experience of the father. I think the experience of, carrying a human in your body and feeding that fetus with your body within, and often once the baby's outside, I think that it's worth having different words to describe these very different things. Another thing that I'd like to address is something someone else brought up, Jeffrey, I believe. And he was saying, you are the best authority on your gender identity, something like that. I can understand that point of view, but my perspective is a little different. I think that identity is socially negotiated rather than strictly something you or I come up with myself. For example, if I were a Christian and I read in the Bible that I am a daughter of God, I am a co-heir with Christ, I might conclude from that it means I am a princess, so my pronouns are she and her highness, and therefore people need to call me by those pronouns because that's how I identify myself. I think that kind of thing would be objectionable. So I believe more in a compromise between a person's personal identity and the social community as well. So it's working together to work out someone's identity. And then finally, Ms. Fawn's question about, since gender non-conforming people are only 2%, like why is this such an issue? Why is it such a problem? Well, in answer to that, I think a lot of people are bothered by, changing rules and allowances for bathroom access and sports teams and, prisons, like which prison you go to, stuff like that. Although I don't think there's a reason to be upset about those things. I'm just saying that people are upset about those things that have resulted. And then another thing is in some group discussions or meetings, or in applications for things, it's become more common for everyone to ask their pronouns. So it's like, all right, well, I'll go around in a circle, introduce yourself, and what are your pronouns? And that used to not be practiced, but now it is. And some people think, well, this is, wasting time, or, if someone wants to make their pronouns known, they can, but they should not require everyone to state their pronoun preference. All right, so those are all my comments. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Lois. Great points, and congratulations, by the way. Very exciting. I want to try to wrap up relatively soon, and we have 2 hands up. So I want to let Basil, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it, if I pronounced it wrong. Hopefully one of them was right. Basil, great. Go ahead.
Hi. Basil. There was a Saint Basil, and I'm named after that saint.
Cool.
A comment about Lois, what she said, as she's expecting, which is wonderful. Congratulations, Lois. The issue, as I understood it, was gender roles, but somehow we branched out from that into all the other different deviations in sexual identity, which I don't believe that was the topic as stated, but that's okay. It was interesting. Thank everybody for their comments. I see the only legitimate gender role is that of producing the next generation, and women need to do that at this time. Although in future we may be able to have babies grow inside some kind of device, so you won't need a woman. Actually, women may welcome that, because once the babies they can have their babies without actually carrying them in their tummies for 9 months or so. They would be welcomed by a lot of women, including Kim Kardashian, who, of course, has another method for having her babies. So otherwise, I see that gender roles should not be limited to one sex or the other, or even the transgenders and the gays and what have you. Why should they be limited? I don't see the point of that. Let everybody do the best they can in society and reap the benefits for the benefits of the service they provide. I would not bar anybody. Of course, we got to keep in mind traditions. People who believe in some religion, they like to point to the scripture and say, God said this, or the prophet said this, therefore we have to follow that. Wow, yeah, that works if you're religious. If you're not, you have to think. You have to think and say, what is really a good role to play, and what does the sexual identity one have to do with it? That's the question. And that's where I rest my case. Let everybody do the best they can, whatever their sex may be, in society, to serve others and serve themselves. And let the women continue their role of bearing children, so that the species and our nation doesn't extinguish become extinguished. I understand that in China, young people don't want to have babies anymore, and that's true in Europe to a large extent. Here in America, we continue to reproduce, thanks primarily, I think, to the immigrants from the South. They're very good at that. This is where I rest my case.
Great, thanks, Basil. And I want to let David go, and then I'm going to kind of wrap up. We try to wrap up around 8:45, and it's a little after that. So go ahead, David, and then I'll go ahead and wrap up.
Just one quick little point as far as the implications for all this. You know, my wife applied to the LCBO. We all know the LCBO. That's where we get our refreshment. And on the application form, there was, do you identify sexually as male, female, or other, I think it was, or it could be non-binary. And then the second question is, do you identify gender as male, female, or other? And then, are you homosexual? Like all these sexual questions, I was astounded because, you know, normally I thought really when you apply for a job, your sexual orientation is not part of the picture. Yeah, you know, there may be some jobs that's an exception, but generally speaking, I didn't think it was part of the application process. I was astounded when I read the application for being a salesperson at the LCBO. They want to know your preferences, sexual preferences. They do a lot, you know, there's like a, you know, you're heterosexual, homosexual, undefined, or other, you know, like there's a slew, but I was just surprised they would even ask. So there is a sort of a concrete implication for these big issues as far as daily life when you go to apply for a job. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but it seemed to me a little outrageous. I thought, man, if I was applying for this job, I'd be a little bit annoyed that they want to know all this.
Yeah,
That's
and
it.
David, just, I'm sorry, let me let you finish.
That's it. No, I'm finished. Thanks, Gary.
So just to transparently share the reason for those questions, at least in the US, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Canada, is actually to prevent discrimination across those bases. They look at statistics from employers, and if they find that a statistically significant percentage of, say, women are being rejected, then they're going to say, hey, you know, hone in on, hey, that company is actually being discriminatory. So it seems a little contradictory that why are you asking these questions? People aren't supposed to discriminate on these, but the reason is actually to prevent companies from discriminating, because if the government never knows what the sex or sexual orientation is of the people applying, they don't know whether or not there's discrimination going on. So it's that transparency that allows them to hone in on the people who are discriminating. So I do want to let Susie go. And then after Susie, I'm going to wrap up. But I do need to wrap up shortly because I'm getting very tired. Go ahead, Susie. Susie, you're on mute. I don't know if you realize.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Yes, this is yeah, I'm calling in from New Jersey. Then I wanted to know how do we explain this to our kid? You see, when they wanted to know, when they ask, how do we explain the you know, the diverse of genders? You know, what do we say to them?
I mean, for me, Susie, it's simple. It's not super simple, but it's as simple as people are, you know, born with a, you know, a gender, and there's a scale of, you know, male to female, and people can identify with anywhere on that scale or multiple places on that scale. And, you know, they can have a sexual preference for people, you know, anywhere on that scale. And there are societal expectations, and you don't have to agree with them or disagree with them. The expectations are out there for some people, but not for everyone. Now, a child has to be of a certain age. You know, I'm not going to explain that to my 5-year-olds. But once they become teenagers, then maybe that's a time where you can start to introduce those types of concepts. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, right. Like, for example, if they go to school and they have come across a kid that have two same genders parents, right? It will be coming to their head. I don't know if they will ask that question, but to me, I probably have it in my head because when I grow up, I don't have this situation where I come up from. I don't have this, so how do you explain to your little one, even with a teenager, I mean, well, anyway.
I mean, I think a teenager is capable of understanding pretty complex things.
Yes.
Even my 5-year-olds understand pretty complex things, but I'm not going to go into all of this complexity at 5. That said,
I have a gay cousin, right? But it's because he was born with a chromosome. He lacking of one chromosome. So he's a man, in all of he's physics is a man, but he act like a woman. Like he behave, his characters, and we love him. I have that, and I have a lot of gay friends, but I just don't understand that is a sexual preference, right? That's a choice that you make.
So ask him if he chooses his like the gender that he identifies with. I would ask him that, Susie, because I've asked a lot of gay people and a lot of transsexual people, and not one of them has said that they choose to be either gay or transsexual. They say that's how they were born. And that's why I said earlier that, I think God or God's servants made people the way that they are, even if they're gay and transsexual. And so to respect God is to respect God's creation, which includes gay and transgendered people, because this is who they are. This is how they were born. It's not a choice according to the people who are that way themselves. And ask yourself, Susie, did you choose to be straight? I didn't choose to be straight. Like I couldn't choose to be gay. Like if I can't choose to be gay, how can a gay person choose to be straight, right? It doesn't make sense that it would go in one direction and not the other. So, I don't know any gay or trans people, and I've asked a lot of them if they choose this, because that's what a lot of the people that were anti-gay and anti-trans said, is they said, these people choose this. And I'm like, well, let me ask them. And when they shared with me, they said they don't choose it. It's how they were born.
Right. Yeah, there was a group like in women prison, they have this saying that, like they will be gay for the stay and then be straight at the gate. So when they got to re-enter into community, they marry and have kids. But while they was there, they act like gay. They are doing gay, like preferences. But yeah, it's okay. I just wonder what a kid, would be. Just like me, I'm confused by that. So figure so many genders. Yeah, but thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Susie, and David. A quick comment, but I really got to wind up. So
yeah, I just wanted to follow up. You said so this way they know there's not discrimination. So are you saying to me they look at, okay, there's we've got a twin spirit person. Well, we don't have enough twin spirit homosexuals, or we have too many transgender heterosexuals. We got to hire only, transgender homosexuals to balance it out to the right statistics. I mean, is this what you're suggesting? Because I was just thinking about it afterwards.
You're choosing you're choosing examples that are not on the forums, but if you want to use common examples,
I think they were.
I gave I mean, maybe they were in the
transgender was on the form, and homosexual heterosexual
twin spirit was on the form.
Oh no, I was just Fawn mentioned it.
I mean,
yeah,
David, that's a very uncommon thing. I didn't learn about it until the last couple of months when I met Miss Fawn.
Yeah, but the point is that I'm making.
I am saying, David, the discrimination based on sexual preference, the reason they ask those questions is to combat discrimination based on the things that they're asking. That is the intent.
So in other words, somebody comes in and they're not of the persuasion that is not being hired enough, so they don't get the job because they're waiting for somebody who is of the persuasion that's.
David, let me give a really clear-cut example. Let's say there's 100,000 employees and prospective employees, and half of them are men and half of them are women, and none of the women get hired. Pretty clear there's some discrimination going on, right? But if you don't know the sex of any of those people, how do you even know that the women didn't get hired? You don't even know.
But
Because
then again, the point I'm making is then hiring becomes a matter of who you are rather than your merits.
no, it's not, because statistically speaking.
Sure it is. You're suggesting it's identity rather than merit.
So are you suggesting that all of the men at that company were qualified, all of the male prospects were qualified, and absolutely not one of the women that got rejected was qualified?
Well, you gave a very extreme example, but my point, I think, should
David,
be well
there are
taken.
there's statistics that show these things within societal norms. And if something is statistically significant, then the chance of it being false is super low. Like, you can get error rates that are like 99% likely there's discrimination going on. And if you don't have the data, you can't even come up with the statistics to show any discrimination, even in the extreme case that I gave, because you have no data. You're completely blind, and you have no way of tracking whether or not there's discrimination at any level. So having no data and not asking anyone the question prevents the government from having any type of way of identifying if there could be discrimination, even if there's abhorrent discrimination. So that's why they asked the question, is to catch the worst offenders. Now, if someone hires 51% men, do you think that the government's going to come in and shut the business down? Nope, they're not, because that's within a statistical norm. Now, if it's statistically completely abnormal, then you might get into an inquiry, right? And then they may start to question people and start to ask questions of, did the interviewers ask you any unusual questions? Again, I don't want to digress on this, but trust me, that is the reason, as an employer of a Fortune 50 company that got trained in this, and I asked the question, this is why it's done.
Good.
So I want to close out. A lot of questions about discrimination and wage gap and glass ceilings. I just want to kind of suggest a takeaway, which is that the important part is that each one of us, in decisions that we can influence, try hard not to be biased for or against anything that is outside of the sphere of control of the people that we can influence. And that can be race, sexual orientation, gender, birth status, socioeconomic status, all of these things that, from birth, all of these things that we can't control. We shouldn't be for or against people based on things they can't control. We should judge people on their merits, as David said, and based on the value that they can add in a specific situation, rather than things that they have no control over. And I think that it's good to accept people as being honest when they describe themselves, unless we find some good reason to believe that they're being dishonest. Trust but verify is a nice it's a nice saying, and and basically accept people as fellow human beings, as Remco said. We are all fellow human beings after all. That said, I want to say thank everybody for coming tonight. Also say, if you're interested in helping each other grow to be the best version of yourselves, seek truth and be fair, consider applying for to be a member of the Freethinker Institute. There's no fee for that. It's just we're going to have members only meetings, probably on the weekends in the middle of the day. And it'll be a smaller group of people that help each other in personal and professional development more carefully and consciously. And then, whether that's of interest or not, I want to encourage everyone to join the online community to stay in touch between these Tuesday night sessions. We have some really interesting conversations on there, very intellectually interesting and satisfying conversations about a wide variety of subjects. And so just want to lastly thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate everybody's comments, contributions. I couldn't follow all of the text chat. I usually can't follow any of it. I followed a little bit tonight. But want to thank everyone for their contributions and encourage everyone to speak up. There were a lot of people that were active in the text chat but weren't speaking up. I want to encourage you, next time, feel free to share your voice and let us hear from you. Everybody's voice matters, and I want to encourage people to be able to share transparently their opinions. This should be a place for us to politely express ourselves, and have everyone else listen with an open mind. So thank you all so much for coming, and hope to see you all next week when we talk about politeness and respectfulness, which was a topic that came up a couple of times tonight. So So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope you all have a great night or morning for those in Australia. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Garrett. Good night.
Thank you, Gary. Good night.